We've ranked all the national parks in California, we've ranked all the national parks in Florida, and after my Southwest road trip this past November, the next addition to this series will be ranking the national parks of Utah. The 5 parks that call this place home, often referred to as the Mighty Five from Utah's iconic ad campaign, are all located in the southern half of the state. Despite their close proximity to one another, it's incredible how different each national park is from the next. They're all classified as desert parks, although some parks feature more greenery than others, and are some of the most beautiful places you can find in America's otherworldly southwest region. I loved visiting all 5 of these parks for their own array of reasons, and that made it very difficult for me to rank them from worst to best. In reality, even Utah's worst national park is quite spectacular, and spots 4 to 1 are all currently in my top 15 favorites in the entire country. So let's jump right in and order these 5 spectacular national parks according to their natural beauty, hiking, and diversity. Starting things off, we've got Bryce Canyon National Park. Bryce Canyon is a park that I still really enjoyed, but if there's one that had to take the rear, there's no doubt in my mind that this was going to be it. The reason being is its size isn't all too big, meaning the diversity in its landscapes and opportunities for hiking pale in comparison to other parks with more advantages. That being said, I thought the majority of the viewpoints scattered around the park were incredible. Looking out over the park's hoodoo formations was amazing, and the hoodoos are unlike any other rock formations I've seen. They're so jagged and portray such imposing color content. Even in the southern part of the park where the hoodoos are much more scarce and there's a greater emphasis on lush hills and mountains, I thought the landscape was very scenic. As for the one hike we did experience, I'd heard so many good things surrounding the Queen's Garden and Navajo Loop Trail. And while there were aspects of it that did impress, I thought it could have been designed much better, as I still firmly believe that the rocky spires are infinitely more impressive from above than from within. I'm sure all the footage I've included looks amazing, but there were several parts of the hike that I didn't find very interesting, especially when the trees would block the hoodoos from view, and why hold on to footage that I don't particularly like? Overall, while this is a gorgeous national park, it's an easy one to knock out in a half a day, which I don't think you could even remotely say about the other 4 on this list. The next one I'm sure is going to be a little controversial, and that's because number 4 is Arches National Park. Arches is a place that so many people love, and I absolutely get it, I love it too. But there's 3 other parks I love even more, and that's why you shouldn't take the ranking too seriously. There's things about Arches that I find absolutely incredible, but at the end of the day, there's not as much landscape variety and as many things to do as the remaining parks we'll talk about. But just to sum up what makes this park so special, it is home to the highest concentration of natural arches in the world. It's one thing to have an incredible quantity of something like that, but for several of these arches to be among the most impressive I've ever seen is another. I think you could make a dang good argument that Delicate Arch is the most spectacular sight in any of the national parks in Utah. It's the most incredible arch I've ever seen, and watching sunset here was an experience I'll never forget. I also found Landscape Arch amazing, the longest arch in North America, and Double Arch was another highlight in the park. That whole windows area is really cool as a whole, and you'll notice all throughout Arches there's lots of opportunity for rock scrambling and climbing, which you don't really get at other national parks. As for the hiking, I thought the Delicate Arch Trail was cool, and I enjoyed lots of the other straightforward paths to get to the arches, but easily the highlight of the bunch was Devil's Garden. This was one of the biggest surprises from the entire trip for me. We saw 6 distinctly different arches along the way, and the hiking was both thrilling and dynamic, with amazing views looking out at distant Badlands outside the park. That and Delicate Arch alone were 2 things I enjoyed more than any one thing at Bryce Canyon personally, and then you factor in the rest of the park and it is a very special place that everyone should visit at some point. Number 3 is Capitol Reef National Park. Though Capitol Reef only comes in at number 3, it cannot be understated how underrated this park is, not only amongst the national parks of Utah, but I think it might also be the most underrated I've been to, period. Most who visit the state for its 5 national parks either stop by to try one of Capitol Reef's famous pies or skip it altogether. We'll get back to the pies later, but simply put, these people are missing out on so much. Capitol Reef is divided into 3 districts, and unfortunately I haven't had the opportunity to experience the famous Cathedral Valley area, which looks absolutely incredible. From what I have seen of the other two districts, Water Pocket Fold and Fruta, the park has some amazing hiking and history. I'd recommend to anyone who enjoys hiking, regardless of their skill level, you have to check out Cassidy Arch Trail. This entire hike is breathtaking, and the arch at the end is one of my favorites in Utah. A harder hike, but also by far my favorite, is the nearly 10-mile journey to and from Navajo Knobs. You'll have the option to stop by Hickman Bridge on the way up, which is cool, but only an appetizer to the unearthly scenery found on the rest of the hike. Getting to see the landscape on a slant was both trippy and extraordinary, and really unlike anything I've seen in nature. That final view at the Knobs might literally be my favorite overlook anywhere in Utah, and if you have the capability to do this hike, you definitely should. To top it all off, I love that the orchards and pies are such an integral part of this park's history, and getting to try the strawberry rhubarb and pumpkin pie at Gifford Homestead was such a treat. The Fremont River, which runs through the Fruta district, and all the trees around it that had turned yellow for the fall were beautiful as well. This is such a gem of a national park, and I hope more people begin to show it some love because it absolutely rivals and even exceeds some of the other parks in the state. Number 2, Canyonlands National Park. Canyonlands is a park that had intrigued me for quite some time, and I'm thrilled to say that it lived up to expectations. I've always been a pretty big fan of canyons and gorges, but those found at Canyonlands might be some of the most unique in the United States. The layering and expansiveness of the canyons here are incredibly different from what you'll find elsewhere, and each of the overlooks we visited were stunning. These can all be found in the Island in the Sky district, which alone would make for a pretty great national park. But if that were it, Canyonlands would be lacking in one very important category, and that's hiking. Luckily, those willing to drive several hours into the interior of the park's canyon country will be rewarded with just that. Some of the best hiking I've ever done can be found in the Needles district of Canyonlands, home to thousands of jagged, rocky spires. I'll never forget hiking the Chesler Park Trail to, of course, Chesler Park, an oasis out in the middle of the desert, and Druid Arch, one of the largest and most unique natural arches in the world. This park has exceedingly incredible natural beauty, awesome hiking, and the two districts we visited couldn't be any more different from one another. It's for all those reasons and more that this is my second favorite national park in Utah, and is just a hair under my number 1 spot, which is none other than Zion National Park. It's hard to argue with any of these parks being someone's favorite in the state, but for me, Zion stood out as a nearly perfect national park in so many ways. For starters, the color content prevalent around the park is stunning, especially within Zion Canyon itself, which is one of the most beautiful canyons in the country. The scenery here is bar none, really impressive, but what stood out to me the most was this might be the best national park there is for hiking. I got to experience 5 different trails throughout Zion National Park, and I want to briefly talk about all of them. The Narrows was extremely unique for me, as you're literally walking through a river and it's up to you to decide when to turn back around. I had a ton of fun with this, but it's not the only unorthodox hike we did here. The Subway Trail might have been the hardest hike I'd ever done, as it wasn't only very strenuous, but the majority was less of a trail and more of a create-your-own-path type of situation. The Subway is way cool, and although it was shorter than I expected, it's definitely very impressive while it lasts. The Zion Canyon Overlook Trail was a surprising one for us. It's only a mile in total, making it approachable for any visitor to the park, and I guess it was for that reason that I didn't expect a whole lot, but the way the trail was designed was great, and the final viewpoint for how little effort you put in is shocking. Observation Point was another thing I had high on my to-do list for Zion. Unfortunately nowadays, it's less accessible since the trail from inside Zion Canyon was destroyed by a rock slide. But it's still worth the effort if you decide to make your way there, as the view you get at the end is the highest of Zion Canyon there is, and it was very surreal that this was our first impression of it. But in my opinion, an even better view can be found on Angel's Landing, the most iconic hike in the park. It's become a difficult one to experience with the permit system restricting the amount of visitors that it would otherwise get, but I think it makes the experience more enjoyable for everyone. Honestly speaking, the way this trail was built was masterful, with all the narrow walkways and chains that help you climb up rocks. Not to mention, the scenery on either side of you is truly breathtaking. We spent a total of 3 days at Zion National Park, and I would have gladly gone for more if we didn't have so much else in our itinerary. If you can only choose to visit one national park in Utah, this has to be the one, because there is so much to do for every visitor, and I think anyone could appreciate the beauty and immersion that this place has to offer. But hopefully you don't have to pick and can visit all 5 of these parks at some point, because they really are all great and fully encapsulate why Utah is one of the most naturally beautiful states we have in America. But with that, let me know in the comments what your favorite of these 5 are, or if you haven't visited this state, which one interests you the most. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could give this video a like and subscribe to Travel Dash, as there's lots more content like this on the way in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye guys.